The morning Parisian sun filters through the silk curtains of Emily Davis's luxurious apartment in the heart of the Upper East Side. At 55, Emily embodies the discreet elegance that only decades of wealth can provide. Her gray hair, always impeccably styled, frames a face that, despite the marks of time, retains traces of classic beauty. This Wednesday morning, Emily follows her usual routine. Dressed in a navy blue silk robe, she enjoys her breakfast on the balcony overlooking the Empire State Building. The New York Times is open in front of her, but her eyes fail to focus on the day's news. Her mind is preoccupied with thoughts of her only son, Peter. "Madam," calls George, her trusted butler for over 20 years. "Your son is on the line. Would you like to take it?" Emily nods and takes the cordless phone that George hands her. "Peter, my dear," she says, her soft voice masking the worry she feels. "Mom," Peter's voice sounds excited on the other end of the line. "How are you? I hope I'm not interrupting your breakfast." "Never, my heart. You know I always have time for you," Emily replies, a genuine smile forming on her lips. "But tell me, what brings the pleasure of this morning call?" There is a pause on the other end of the line, and Emily can practically feel her son's hesitation. "Mom, I've met someone." Emily's heart races, but she remains calm. "That's wonderful, Peter. Tell me more." "Her name is Sophie," Peter begins, his voice full of enthusiasm. "She's a nurse living in a small town near Albany. We met during my last business trip." Emily's chest tightens. "Albany? A nurse from a small town?" That's not what she had imagined for her son. "A nurse, how interesting," she manages to say, striving to keep a neutral tone. "She's amazing, Mom," Peter continues, oblivious to his mother's emotions. "She's intelligent, compassionate, and has a huge heart. You'll love her when you meet her." "When I meet her?" Emily nearly chokes on her coffee. "You're already at that point?" Peter laughs on the other end of the line. "We've been dating for 3 months. I thought it was time to tell you." 3 months? Emily feels a mix of hurt and concern. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "I wanted to be sure, Mom. You know how complicated things can be with our financial situation." "Ah, yes, the financial situation," the euphemism for the Davis family's considerable fortune. Emily knows all too well how it can complicate relationships. How many times had she doubted the intentions of the people around her? "I see," she finally says. "And this Sophie, does she know about our family?" "Not in detail," Peter replies after a brief hesitation. "She knows I come from a wealthy family, but I didn't make a big deal of it. I want her to love me for who I am, not for what I have." Emily feels a pang of pride mixed with apprehension. Her son has always been idealistic, sometimes too much for his own good. "That's very noble of you, my dear, but it can also be dangerous." "I know, Mom, but Sophie is different. I'm sure you'll love her when you meet her." The conversation continues for a few more minutes, with Peter sharing some details about Sophie and his plan to bring her to New York soon. When they finally hang up, Emily remains seated in silence, gazing at the city beyond her balcony. George approaches quietly. "Is everything all right, madam?" Emily sighs deeply. "Peter is dating a nurse from a small town near Albany." The butler raises an eyebrow, but keeps a neutral expression. "I see, madam. And what do you think?" "Worried, George, very worried," admits Emily, rising from her chair. "Peter has always been very naive when it comes to matters of the heart. And this girl, Sophie, what do we know about her? Nothing. She could be after his money, our fortune." "Young Peter has always had good judgment, madam," George says gently. "Perhaps, but I cannot take that risk. I cannot allow my only son to be deceived or manipulated." She moves to the edge of the balcony, her eyes fixed on the city below, but her mind is far away, in a small town near Albany, wondering what kind of woman this Sophie could be. "What do you intend to do, madam?" George asks, noticing the determined look on his employer's face. Emily turns, her eyes shining with newfound resolve. "I am going to meet this Sophie, George, but not as Peter's mother, not as Emily Davis. I need to see who she really is without the mask she would undoubtedly wear for her wealthy boyfriend's mother." George nods, recognizing the tone of voice that indicates Emily Davis has made up her mind and won't change it. "As you wish, madam. Shall I arrange for a trip to Albany?" "Not yet, George," Emily replies, a plan already forming in her mind. "First, I need to think of a way to approach her without raising suspicion. I need a disguise, a convincing story." As the sun rises in the sky over New York, Emily Davis, the discreet millionaire, begins to devise a plan to protect her son and her legacy, unaware that this decision will change not only Peter's life, but her own in ways she could never have imagined. The days following Peter's revelation are hectic for Emily Davis. Her mind is in constant motion, making and unmaking plans to meet Sophie without arousing suspicion. Finally, after a week of meticulous preparation, she makes a decision. "George!" calls Emily, entering the study where her faithful butler is organizing documents. "I need you to make some arrangements for me." George looks up, attentive. "Certainly, madam. What do you need?" "I'm going to Albany," she announces firmly, "but not as Emily Davis, the millionaire. I'm going as Elise Moreau, a simple seamstress from New York." George raises an eyebrow, but shows no more surprise than that. After so many years, he was used to his employer's sometimes eccentric plans. "I see, madam. And what will Elise Moreau's story be?" Emily smiles, pleased that George understands so quickly. "Elise is an old family friend. She's on a business trip to Albany, and Peter has asked her to visit his girlfriend, Sophie, because he can't make it due to work." In the following days, Emily dedicates herself to building her new persona. She buys simple, but neat clothes suitable for a middle-class seamstress. She adopts a slightly different accent and studies the basics of sewing to maintain her facade. On the morning of her departure, Emily barely recognizes the woman in the mirror. Her usually elegantly styled gray hair is tied in a simple bun. She wears a modest floral dress and comfortable shoes. The only item she keeps from her real life is a discreet gold ring, a keepsake from her mother. "You are unrecognizable, madam," comments George, looking at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "That's the point, George," replies Emily, adjusting her simple framed glasses. "Remember, from now on, I am Elise Moreau." The train ride to Albany is a surreal experience for Emily. Used to the luxury of first class, she finds herself sitting in an ordinary carriage, watching the countryside pass by the window. Upon arriving in Albany, Emily, or rather Elise, takes a bus to the small town where Sophie lives. Her heart races as she approaches her destination. Will her plan work? Will she be able to uncover Sophie's true intentions? Standing in front of Sophie's modest house, Emily takes a deep breath, adjusts her bag on her shoulder, and rings the doorbell. She hears footsteps approaching. In a few seconds, the door opens. "Hello," says a smiling young woman with wavy brown hair and bright green eyes. "Can I help you?" Emily swallows, gathering her courage. This is the moment of truth. "Hello," she says, her voice a bit higher than usual. "You must be Sophie. I'm Elise Moreau, a friend of Peter's family. He asked me to come see you, as he won't be able to visit soon due to work." Sophie's face lights up at the mention of Peter's name. "Oh, that's wonderful. Peter told me that a family friend might visit. Please come in." As Sophie leads her into the house, Emily feels a mix of relief and anxiety. Her disguise had worked, but the hardest part was yet to come, getting to know Sophie without revealing her true identity and discovering her real intentions towards Peter. The house is simple but welcoming. Family photos adorn the walls, and a lavender scent fills the air. Sophie gestures for Emily to sit on the living room couch. "Would you like some tea, Miss Morrow?" Sophie offers, smiling warmly. "Yes, please, and call me Elise," Emily responds, feeling strangely comfortable in this modest setting. While Sophie goes to the kitchen to prepare the tea, Emily looks around, taking in every detail. Her journey to uncover the truth about Sophie had only just begun, and she was determined not to let any detail escape her meticulous observation. Sophie returns to the living room with a tray holding a steaming teapot, 2 delicate porcelain cups, and a plate of homemade biscuits. The sweet smell of chamomile fills the room. "I hope you like chamomile, Elise," Sophie says, setting the tray on the coffee table. "I made the biscuits this morning. Please help yourself." Emily observes Sophie closely as she pours the tea with grace and care. Her movements are fluid and precise, like someone used to taking care of others. "Thank you, my dear," replies Emily, maintaining her role as Elise. She takes the cup, feeling the comforting warmth in her hands. "Your home is charming." Sophie blushes slightly. "That's very kind of you. It's nothing compared to what Peter must be used to, but it's home." Emily feels a pang of guilt hearing the sincere modesty in Sophie's voice. She takes a bite of a biscuit, surprised by the delicate vanilla and lemon flavor. "These biscuits are delicious," Emily compliments sincerely. "You are an excellent cook." "Oh, thank you," Sophie responds, her eyes shining. "I learned from my grandmother. She always said the secret to a happy home is a kitchen that smells good." Emily notices a portrait on the wall showing an elderly woman holding a young Sophie in her arms. "Is that your grandmother?" she asks, pointing to the photo. Sophie nods, a nostalgic smile on her lips. "Yes, that's Grandma Mathilde. She's no longer with us, but her teachings live on." The conversation flows naturally, with Sophie talking about her childhood in this small town and her work as a nurse. Emily listens attentively, impressed by the eloquence and passion with which the young woman speaks about her profession. "It must be rewarding to help people like that," Emily comments, genuinely interested. "It's challenging sometimes," Sophie admits, "but I can't imagine doing anything else. Every life we touch, every person we help to recover, is worth it." As they talk, Emily can't help but notice the little details of the house. The curtains are simple but well maintained. The furniture, while not luxurious, is impeccably clean and organized. There are personal touches in every corner: a vase of fresh flowers, a crocheted blanket on the couch, books neatly arranged on shelves. "Peter told me you were a seamstress in New York," Sophie says, bringing Emily back from her observations. "It must be exciting to work in fashion in this city." Emily has a moment of panic, but quickly recovers. "Oh yes, it's an interesting job, but actually, I'd like to know more about you and Peter." "How did you meet?" Sophie laughs softly. "It was quite unexpected, actually. I was on duty at the hospital when Peter arrived with a colleague who had sprained his ankle. He was so worried about his friend, so kind. We started talking while I took care of the patient, and everything just fell into place." Emily watches Sophie's face as she talks about Peter. Her eyes sparkle, and her voice softens. It's impossible to miss the sincere affection in her words. As the afternoon wears on, Emily finds herself increasingly drawn to Sophie. The young woman speaks clearly, shows compassion, and has a maturity beyond her years. Her hospitality is warm and genuine, and Emily feels truly welcome. As the sun begins to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Emily realizes that hours have passed. "Oh my, how time flies," she says, placing her empty cup on the table. "I don't want to overstay my welcome, Sophie." Not at all, Sophie gently protests. It was a pleasure having you, Elise. I hope we can see each other again soon. As they say goodbye at the door, Emily feels a mixture of emotions. Her plan to discover Sophie's true intentions now seems almost ridiculous. The young woman she met today was sincere, kind, and clearly in love with Peter. Returning to her hotel, Emily reflects on her day. Her mind is filled with new impressions and contradictory thoughts. What had started as a mission to investigate had turned into something much more complex. The next morning, Emily wakes up early in her modest hotel room, still reeling from the previous day's events. She had planned to stay in town for a few days, hoping to learn more about Sophie. Disguising herself once again as Elise Moreau, she decides to take a morning stroll through the town. As she walks through the narrow streets, Emily spots a familiar figure exiting a small grocery store. It's Sophie, carrying bags of groceries. The young woman looks tired, with dark circles under her eyes. Sophie! Emily calls out, playing the role of Elise. Do you need help with those bags? Sophie turns, a tired but sincere smile lighting up her face. Elise, what a nice surprise. No, thank you. I can manage. I'm used to it. Emily insists on accompanying Sophie to her home. On the way, she notices the nurse's uniform partially visible under Sophie's blouse. Did you just finish your shift? Emily asks, genuine concern in her voice. Sophie nods. Yes, I worked the night shift. Now I'm heading home to make breakfast for my grandmother before getting some rest. Emily frowns. Your grandmother? I thought you said she... Oh, not Grandma Mathilde. Sophie quickly clarifies. My paternal grandmother, Claudette. She moved in with me a few months ago. She has early-stage Alzheimer's. Upon arriving at the house, Emily insists on helping Sophie prepare breakfast. While they prepare a simple but nourishing meal, Sophie explains her situation further. I work at the hospital at night and take care of Grandma during the day, she says, cracking eggs into a bowl. It's not easy, but she needs me. I can't leave her in a nursing home. Emily watches Sophie move efficiently around the kitchen, even after an exhausting night shift. It must be difficult to juggle everything, she comments, feeling a new wave of respect for the young woman. Sophie shrugs, a tired smile on her lips. It's tiring, yes, but it's what needs to be done. Grandma always took care of me. Now it's my turn to return the favor. Just then, a faint call comes from the bedroom. Sophie, are you there? I'm coming, Grandma, Sophie replies, placing the eggs in the pan. Elise, could you please watch the eggs for a few minutes? I need to help my grandmother get up. Emily nods and watches Sophie disappear down the hallway. She hears soft voices, words of encouragement, and soon Sophie reappears, guiding a frail elderly lady to the kitchen table. Grandma, this is Elise, a friend. Sophie introduces. Elise, this is my grandmother, Claudette. Emily greets the lady with a warm smile, noticing her confused but kind expression. Sophie serves breakfast with infinite patience, assisting her grandmother when necessary and keeping the conversation light. After the meal, while Sophie helps Claudette settle in the living room, Emily offers to do the dishes. Standing in the small kitchen, she reflects on everything she has witnessed. The Sophie she met these past 2 days is very different from the gold digger Emily had imagined. She is a young woman facing enormous responsibilities with grace and determination. She works hard as a nurse, cares for her sick grandmother, and still finds time to have a relationship with Peter. When Sophie returns to the kitchen, Emily notices the deep circles under her eyes and her fatigue. Sophie, my dear, Emily says gently, you need to rest. Go lie down. I can stay with your grandmother for a few hours. Sophie hesitates, but her exhaustion is evident. Are you sure, Elise? I don't want to impose. Not at all, insists Emily. Go rest. Your grandmother and I will be fine. As Sophie finally succumbs to the necessary sleep, Emily finds herself sitting in the living room with Claudette, chatting softly and helping the lady with her needs. The millionaire disguised as a seamstress realizes that her initial prejudices have been completely overturned. Sophie is not a gold digger but an extraordinary young woman with a huge heart and admirable strength of character. In the days that follow, Emily settles into a surprisingly comfortable routine in her role as Elise. She offers to help Sophie care for Claudette, pretending she has free time while waiting for business meetings in town. Sophie, initially reluctant, eventually accepts this help with gratitude. During these shared hours, Emily has the opportunity to get to know Sophie better. It is during a quiet afternoon, as the two women organize a photo album to help Claudette's memory, that Emily makes a surprising discovery. Who are these people? Emily asks, pointing to a photo of an elegantly dressed family in front of a grand mansion. Sophie hesitates for a moment, her fingers tracing the edges of the picture. That's my family, she replies softly. My parents, my older brother, and me when I was about 10 years old. Emily looks closer, noticing the expensive attire and the luxurious setting. You seem well off, she comments cautiously. Sophie sighs, a distant look in her eyes. We were. My father was a successful businessman. We had a comfortable life until everything fell apart. Emily waits patiently, her heart pounding, until Sophie continues. My father made risky investments. At first, they seemed promising, but then we lost everything. The house, the cars, the savings. Everything was gone in a few months. Emily feels a wave of empathy. Oh, Sophie, I'm so sorry. That must have been terrible. Sophie nods, a sad smile on her lips. It was hard. We had to move here, to Grandma Claudette's house. My parents never really recovered. My father died a few years ago from a heart attack. My mother couldn't handle the change. She moved to London with my brother. And you stayed here to take care of your grandmother, Emily says softly. Yes, someone had to stay. And honestly, I like it here. It's a simpler life, but I find satisfaction in earning my living, in making a difference as a nurse. Emily watches Sophie carefully. Have you never thought about trying to get back to your old life? Sophie shakes her head. No, that life wasn't real, you know. It was like a golden dream. This, she gestures around her. This is real. It's honest. It's who I really am. Does Peter know about your past? Emily asks, curious. Sophie hesitates again. No, I never found the right moment to tell him. And to be honest, I'm afraid of his reaction. People tend to see you differently when they know you had money and lost it. They assume you're desperate to get that lifestyle back. Emily feels a pang of guilt, remembering her own assumptions. But you're not, she states. No, Sophie replies firmly. I love Peter for who he is, not for what he has. If I wanted a life of luxury, I would have accepted Jean-Luc's marriage proposal, the mayor's son. But that's not what I want. I want a life that has meaning, a purpose. I want to make a difference and be with someone who loves me for who I am now, not for who I was before. Emily remains silent, absorbing everything she has heard. Sophie, the young woman she had initially suspected of being a gold digger, came from a background similar to hers. Yet, she had chosen a life of service and simplicity. At that moment, Emily understands she was completely wrong about Sophie. The young woman wasn't hiding a sordid secret, but protecting her heart and integrity. Ironically, she is exactly the kind of person Emily always hoped her son would meet. Time flies, and Emily finds herself on the eve of her departure. She had extended her stay longer than planned, charmed by the simplicity of life in the small town and, more importantly, by Sophie's company. That afternoon, Emily and Sophie are sitting in the small backyard garden, enjoying the gentle sun, while Claudette naps inside. The sound of a car approaching disrupts the tranquility of the moment. "Oh no," Sophie murmurs, her face tense. It's Jean-Luc's car. Before Emily can ask who Jean-Luc is, a tall, well-dressed man enters the garden. His expensive suit and the gold watch on his wrist testify to his wealth. "Sophie, my dear," he exclaims, ignoring Emily's presence. "What a pleasure to find you at home." Sophie stands, visibly uncomfortable. "Jean-Luc, what are you doing here?" The man smiles, a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. "I've come to make you an offer you can't refuse." Emily watches the scene unfold, feeling like an intruder, but unable to look away. Jean-Luc dramatically kneels and pulls a velvet box from his pocket. "Sophie, marry me. I promise to give you the life you deserve, far from this simple place. Think of all we could have together." Sophie pales and takes a step back. "Jean-Luc, we've talked about this. I'm not interested." Jean-Luc interrupts, his voice growing harder. "Do you really want to spend the rest of your life working as a nurse, taking care of old people? I can give you back everything you lost. I can give you back the life you had before." Emily feels her heart tighten. This is the moment of truth. Will Sophie succumb to the temptation of regaining her old life of luxury? To her surprise and relief, Sophie straightens up, her eyes shining with determination. "Jean-Luc, I appreciate your offer, but my answer is still no. I don't want the life I had before. I'm happy with who I am now and the work I do." Jean-Luc stands, his face contorted with anger. "It's because of that New Yorker, isn't it? What can he give you that I can't?" "True love," Sophie simply replies. "Peter loves me for who I am, not for what I have or what I could be. He values my work, my dedication to my family. I'm not with him for money or status, Jean-Luc. I'm with him because I love him." Emily feels a surge of pride and emotion at Sophie's words. Any doubts she may have had about the young woman's intentions dissipate in that instant. Jean-Luc looks from Sophie to Emily, who is still sitting quietly. "And who is this?" he asks, finally noticing Emily's presence. "This is Elise, a friend of Peter's family," Sophie answers firmly. "And she can attest that my decision is final. Respect it and leave." The man seems to want to argue further, but something in Sophie's determined expression makes him step back. With a final furious look, he turns on his heels and leaves the garden, the sound of his car speeding away in the quiet street. Sophie collapses into the chair next to Emily, trembling slightly. "I'm sorry, Elise. Jean-Luc can be very persistent." Emily places a comforting hand on Sophie's arm. "You were wonderful, my dear. Your words about Peter were very touching." Sophie smiles, a light blush coloring her cheeks. "I meant every word. Peter makes me want to be a better person. He supports me, encourages me. With him, I feel I can be myself without fear or shame of my past or present." At that moment, looking at Sophie's radiant face, Emily knows she has found not only a suitable daughter-in-law for her son, but also an extraordinary young woman she is already starting to love as a daughter. The morning of her departure, Emily wakes up with a heavy feeling in her chest. The thought of leaving the town and Sophie without revealing her true identity now seems impossible. After several days of living together, after witnessing Sophie's kindness and integrity, Emily feels ashamed of her initial plan. She slowly packs her bags, rehearsing mentally how she will make the revelation. When she arrives at Sophie's house to say goodbye, she finds the young woman preparing breakfast. "Good morning, Elise," Sophie says with a smile, but there is something different in her gaze, a mix of anticipation and nervousness. "Sophie," Emily begins, her voice slightly trembling, "I have something to tell you." Sophie sets the cup she holds on the table and nods. I also have something to say, Elise. Or should I say, Mrs. Davis? Emily feels the ground shift beneath her feet. You knew? Sophie smiles gently. From the first day. Peter has a picture of you in his apartment, an old photo from when you were about my age. You haven't changed much. Emily collapses into a chair, stunned. But why didn't you say anything? Why pretend all this time? Because I understood why you were here. You wanted to get to know the real me, without the pressure of being Peter's mother. And I wanted you to know me too, just like that. Were you not angry? Emily asks, still incredulous. Sophie shakes her head. At first, I was a little hurt. Then I realized it was an opportunity, a chance to show you who I really am without trying to impress or meet expectations. Emily feels tears welling up. Oh, Sophie, I have been so foolish. I came here suspecting you, thinking you were after Peter's money. Instead, I found an incredible young woman, generous and hardworking. I understand your concerns, Sophie says gently. In your place, I would probably have the same worries. That's why I never told Peter about my past. I didn't want him to think I was with him for his wealth. Emily takes Sophie's hands in hers. My dear, after what I have seen and heard these past few days, and especially yesterday with Jean-Luc, I have no doubts about your feelings for Peter. You love him for the man he is, not for what he has. Sophie smiles, tears in her eyes. I really do, Mrs. Davis. Peter is the kindest and most considerate man I have ever met. Call me Emily, the older woman says, smiling through her own tears. And I apologize from the bottom of my heart for doubting you. There is nothing to forgive, Sophie replies. In fact, I am grateful for this experience. I got to know Peter's mother without having to impress her and discovered that I liked her very much. The two women embrace, laughing and crying at the same time. When they part, Emily holds Sophie's face in her hands. My dear, you are exactly the kind of person I have always dreamed of for Peter, strong, compassionate, hardworking. I am proud to have you as part of our family. Sophie blushes, her eyes shining with happiness. Thank you, Emily. That means a lot to me. Now, says Emily, wiping her tears, I think it's time to call Peter and tell him everything. What do you think? Sophie laughs. I think he will be very surprised, but yes, it's time to end the secrets. While Sophie goes to fetch the phone, Emily looks out the window at the small town that has become so dear to her in a few days. She had come to find a gold digger and found a daughter. The surprises of life, she muses, are sometimes the best blessings.